Black Box Podcast, BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. We've mentioned a few cases about serial killers on this channel recently, and when you're following a lot of true crime, do you ever notice there just seem to be patterns that repeat themselves? There just seem to be the same behavioral issues that are going on in a lot of the different cases. And maybe you can even say that at a greater level, like the same trends keep going on and on with history, like history repeating itself, that whole thing. And definitely in the political world as well, it's like the same problems. I mean, we could talk for ages about that. Like, if you listen to the political news from like the 1950s, you could hear those things on YouTube. Like, I heard Meet the Press from back from the 1950s. It could have been from today. It's like it's the same story that just gets recycled. But that's a different conversation. When you're going to talk about something like serial killers, though, a lot of people really want to zone in on a series of factors. They say that serial killers are very likely to be people who have been abused, starting fires as a kid, harming animals, and frequent bedwetting, like a bedwetting that would definitely continue up until the early preteen age. But I believe Sarah Silverman wrote a book about that called The Bedwetter or something. I think she was a bedwetter until she was 13. And that's a big thing, though, actually. I mean, to quote another comedian, Judy Gold, though, Judy Gold said, the way that she dealt with, like, social problems growing up was she became a comedian. And you really see, though, that a lot of people go off in some very different directions. And that's the giant mystery of society. Why do some people just go on and kind of not turn to violence and destructive behavior because of the unfortunate events that they've experienced? Recently, I was learning about the serial killer Joel Rifkin, and he was someone that was quite different. He was bullied in high school and bullied just all throughout his youth, really. But he was someone who didn't have the signs of sexual abuse. He wasn't starting fires. He wasn't hurting animals. But it was like almost enough to kind of push him toward becoming a serial killer. I mean, like, there are a lot of question marks around that, but there's a big thing we can talk about in a second. Then you have other people like yesterday. We mentioned Glenn Rogers, someone the exact opposite of Joel Rifkin. It's not that he's being bullied. It's that he is the victim of abuse. Watching his father beat his mother, exposure to poisons and toxic chemicals, stealing from a young age, antisocial behavior. Every single bad thing that could have gone wrong went wrong. And that's the way you got to describe a lot of these serial killer cases. Like, even somebody such as John Hughes from Mississippi saying that he just would spend countless amounts of time alone in the woods, and then he would start harming animals. And if he was ever playing with his siblings, he would take the games too far and really become like out of control. And okay, so what are all these things? What's going on? One of the reasons why I personally believe a lot of people turn toward things like murder and become serial killers is they are still trying to search for that sort of acceptance and approval from society, especially from women. I mean, that could even be one thing you could even zone in on if you would get to the heart and soul of the issue with many people. It's that they just want to be accepted by, well, they're the opposite gender. We, of course, have serial killers like the Doodler and the Candyman that are targeting, they're homosexual serial killers, we could say, targeting men. But for the people who are targeting women, sexual frustration is a big thing, but moving toward acceptance, trying to get acceptance and approval from society and from women. And I don't think people are exactly approaching it like that. I was recently listening to an interview with the writer Dylan Volk, and he was promoting his book, I believe, Bad Decisions Make Good Stories. And once again, that's written by Dylan Volk. And he was talking about how men often use things like affection and things like just like cuddling and affectionate behavior from women. They use that as a form of approval, and he's saying that like he thinks it's a good thing. And I was just like, I thought he was going to try and present it like as it's something bad that they shouldn't do. I mean, that definitely helps you figure out the early 20s. I mean, I'll tell you that, sadly. But aside from that, it's like, you can just sort of see, though, that there is this type of sort of yearning kind of passion to just kind of be sort of accepted. And it's like, if I can't be accepted by you, I'm going to destroy you. And there's a sort of notion that's going on with a lot of these people. And even some of the more famous examples that we mentioned, perhaps someone like Ted Bundy or something would be a good example of this based on the nature of his crimes. Definitely with Jeffrey Dahmer and all those bizarre hobbies that he had, so to speak. And I don't really mean to include too much dark humor into this. But the thing is, it's just like, you can definitely see, though, that people are obsessed with domination. Domination is overwhelmingly one of the factors that drives people to kill. But acceptance from society is, I think, kind of the other side of the coin. It's like a yin and yang, like the black and white thing coming together. And I say that because if we're going to look at the issue, we got to look at the whole thing, not just the only thing. All right, these guys just want to dominate someone and they're taking it to the extreme. Yes, but what's the other side of the coin? What's the other side of the spectrum? And that would sort of be that they really want to just be accepted. They want to kind of have someone let them in and show them that sort of type of human response. Like, it's just like, once again, using things like affectionate behavior as a form of acceptance. What they really want is acceptance from society, acceptance from women, acceptance from their chosen sexual partners. That you'd think that goes without saying, but no, it doesn't really get reiterated that way in a lot of the serial killer literature. Mostly they just want to focus on, okay, this person has destructive behavior because of their bad childhood experiences, and that gets kind of exacerbated by kind of some more destructive behaviors in the teen years, usually revolving sexuality. It's like the big pattern that I see with most serial killers is child abuse, maybe exposure to lots of animals getting killed. I mean, that's a big thing. Watching animals die and suffer, like you often find it's people who have connections to a slaughterhouse or something like that. Then you have things like we said, the bedwetting, things like witnessing domestic violence, right? All of those things, the problematic behavior that a child could experience. Then they get to the teen years, and they are rejected from people because of their antisocial behavior, because they've had these sort of unprocessed childhood traumas that they haven't dealt with, and they don't know how to deal with it, and it's not an easy thing to deal with. I mean, that's like, these are things that people have to work out slowly over years. This is the therapeutic process. It's not so instantaneous. But then they're just kind of bizarre to other people. They are abnormal. And then anyone they're trying to approach during the teen years is going to reject them. And they're just going to be like, you're weird, I don't want to talk to you. And that's going to lead to kind of that, once again, that sort of kind of just hankering feeling for acceptance from society. And even to the point when they go on to actually get married, when they go on to actually get a girlfriend, then they don't really ever break out of that mold. They're recreating the cycle of destructive behaviors with that sort of desire for acceptance in society that is never going to be met in their mind. In their mind, they will never be accepted, so the only alternative is to destroy. I mean, like, that's just kind of the thing that I've been sort of thinking about recently. But the thing is, though, you do see, though, that so many of these serial killers are married, they're in relationships. It's not like they just had, this burning kind of lingering feeling inside them. It's like, if I only had, acceptance from a woman, my life would be better. Oh, she wants to go out with me? Okay, bad feelings have disappeared, sublime, and then like everything's just okay, and then it's all just daisies and rainbows. It doesn't seem to be like that, because unprocessed childhood traumas stay in people for their entire life unless they kind of are able to deal with it through the therapeutic process. And I mean, like, I think that is so much easier said than done, given how nasty a lot of the things in our system are. That's the quote-unquote system that we're talking about. Very destructive indeed. So I think, though, just the unprocessed childhood traumas cannot really be overcome so easily. And even though this person has obtained what they claimed that they wanted, look how many people, though, even if you get away from the sexuality thing, even if you get away from the acceptance from women thing, look at acceptance from society. So many people are just working jobs and they have careers and stuff, like Robert Hansen in Alaska, the butcher baker, is Bob the baker running Bob's Bakery, and everything's just fine. He's married, family life, and then That's not enough, though. It does not break out of that rejection that he experienced as a teenager, child abuse, experiencing witnessing the death of animals, chronic agony that people made fun of him for, and we just mentioned Joel Rifkin, all the bullying that he experienced, and some people just like would kind of describe him as kind of mellow but very depressed, and the did not they did not really understand him because once again of all these negative experiences that he was experiencing growing up, and like you just can't break out of that mold. The person is like in a mold or something. And yes, of course, there are just the plain psychopathic killers. Once again, psychopath meaning that they were born without a conscience, they were born without the ability to process human empathy, and they're almost just programmed to kill, destroy, dominate, and spread unwarranted destruction. I definitely can accept that some people are not really following the pathways of abuse, recreating the cycle of destructive behaviors, and kind of turning it into that spectrum of I really want acceptance, but I know I can't have it, so I'm just going down the spectrum toward I'm going to destroy anyone that would have potentially rejected me. That type of psychological facet. So, I mean, like some people are just going to be born to kill, and we have to accept that as a society, as dangerous as it sounds. The other thing is though, there are many people though that are heavily involved with things like just the narcissistic serial killer. It's really more like I should take that back. It's not so much a serial killer that I noticed the narcissistic stuff from. It's the kind of like maybe the kind of person that just wants to murder their significant other to get the life insurance money. They want to commit a murder to kind of instead of getting the divorce, they want to commit a murder against their business partner so they can claim half of the business. The person who's just like I'm only in it for myself. The sort of Chris Watts type of murder, like where the person has, the ability to experience shame and guilt and such, but they aren't necessarily so focused on their family members when they're living. Chris Watts, of course, murdered his wife and murdered his two daughters, and he tried to hide their bodies so he could start a new relationship with his girlfriend, didn't want the financial pressures that would come from a divorce. That I definitely think is just caught up in the narcissistic mess. And that's not exactly the type of serial killer motivation, because how many times have we said it on this channel? Money, sex, and power are the motivations why people commit crimes. That's true. I accept that. And the serial killers don't necessarily seem to be killing for money. Very few of them. Of course, there are some exceptions, but when you look at all of the people targeting sex workers, I mean, like, it's vulnerability is a big thing for them. A lot of people though do have the type of kind of sexually motivated thing where they kind of want to take the prostitute to a secluded area. They force them into sign of sort of like disgusting sex acts, and then they would be murdered. And that would be something that you see of people like Gary Ridgway, as well as Ted Bundy. We mentioned Robert Hansen also preyed on prostitutes. It's just countless times. They're in a very vulnerable place. And that's also dealing with the sort of, once again, though, we said there are two sides of the spectrum. They secretly want acceptance from women. They secretly want approval from women, but they just think, oh, I'm just not worthy. I just can't get it. It's just never going to happen because of all of these crappy things that people told me when I was a kid and these crappy things that my father said when he was beating me. Therefore, the only way that I can ever achieve any sort of domination is if I destroy you. If I can't have you, no one will. And that's what's leading to this out of control sort of serial killer phenomenon. And I say phenomenon only because it seems to be happening. There are people who just target multiple individuals. It's global. It's worldwide. It has no limits to race. It has no limits to even gender if you're really going to start counting numbers. I mean, there's not really an enormous thing. It's not like you have to commit more than 10 murders to be a serial killer or anything. Women are involved in these things in a variety of ways, especially if you just look at how women are involved in like the planning of many things and the accomplice is in the accomplice aspect. We just mentioned David Parker Ray on this channel. He had a woman helping him. It's like these things know no boundaries. I mean, crime knows no boundaries, and this type of evil, destructive behavior does not have any sort of boundary to race and gender, nationality, and region that you're living in. It can happen from anyone. And that's a big thing we also have to admit in society. Anyone can really be capable of this. Agatha Christie wrote it. You never really know what anyone is thinking or what anyone is really like. That's something that we are going to have to deal with, and it's very difficult to detect when people are growing up. When it comes to the teen years, and like though, it really seems to come out in a different way, where it's that whole thing where they want to be involved in dating and relationships, but they don't seem to have the social faculties to do so. And I think a different side of them comes out. But though, one of the just things about how people can kind of deal with this is rejection from society is a mental awareness issue, and that is something that we can try and address in our education system. And the other things about this, about dealing with unhealed process trauma, is really just to try and kind of isolate where it is, and that's something that the sort of therapeutic agents would try to work out of the person. And social and emotional learning, we've talked about that a lot. Meditation and mindfulness, those things are also perhaps alternatives. And I mean, just we're just scratching the surface now on that stuff. And I would just say though, what do you think about anything we've said about serial killers so far? What do you think about the motivations that drive people to kill? And what do you think about the symptoms of serial killers? Until next time.